Greetings Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Welcome back, everyone. Hello, Mavericks and new viewers. Great to have everyone here. We have a great deal to unpack tonight. Mike Pekarek will join us a little later in the program to give us his analysis on where things stand with the Ukraine-Russia war and what the Trump factor means in all of this, now that we've had just a little over a week of the new administration showing us where they are kind of taking things. So we'll get Mike's take on that. We'll also touch on this meeting today between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. So we'll dig into all of that. And Justin Trudeau speaking in Ottawa at a Lunar New Year reception and touching on this whole issue of tariffs, trade, Trump. Everything comes back to Trump these days. He's not just sucking the oxygen out of the room, he's sucking the oxygen out of the conversation worldwide. So stay with me. We have a lot to talk about tonight. And it's a privilege to have you all here with us tonight. I'll be right back.
Maverick News. Fighting for freedom. Greetings brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, defending free speech, Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
I just happened to take a look in the chat over on the main Rumble channel, which thankfully is running properly here tonight, and I see somebody saying, I support the YouTube page to help Rick, but they are an odd bunch over there. Yeah, it's a different group in the YouTube community than it is over on Rumble, and I would say that's because not everybody in the chat on the YouTube channel, the main one right now, is actually a Maverick. Not everybody. There's some people in there who are just intentionally disruptive, but I believe in free speech, so I do my best to not be so judgmental that we start stifling things. But there's some good people in there too, lots of good people in the YouTube chat that I like to see there every night. So I'm just glad to have everybody here. And for those who disagree with the way I I think or the way I speak, I just work every night to win hearts and minds. It's all we can do. So anyway, yeah, Trudeau speaking at Lunar New Year celebration. Let's go there first to Ottawa and pick this up. This is all fresh. It's new. It's happening right now. It's ongoing in the nation's capital. And yes, he is going to touch on, I believe, the whole issue of Trump and tariffs. Here we go.
But above all, this year, it's about renewal, recognizing the end of winter and the coming spring season while looking to a brighter future instead of dwelling on the past. And appropriately, this year is the year of the snake, an animal which symbolizes transformation, wisdom, and resilience.
Yeah, that's
Resilience.
Sure. Change.
And that, more than anything, is a value that Korean Canadians, Vietnamese Canadians, and Chinese Canadians embody. Korean Canadians who often migrated to Canada with little to no money in their pocket now contribute to our country in countless ways. Les Canadiens d'origine vietnamienne qui ont fui les horreurs de la guerre et se trouvent un refuge ici et font maintenant partie de notre grande famille canadienne. And Chinese Canadians who persevered despite deep discrimination to not only build vibrant, prosperous communities, but to literally build this country. A history we are proud to celebrate with our government's investment in the Chinese Canadian Museum that recently opened in Vancouver. Resilience has long been a value you've embraced, and it's a value I think Canadians of all backgrounds have wholeheartedly embraced as well. These past few weeks have been challenging, but that resilience, that camaraderie we've seen on display has been remarkable. And in the spirit of the Lunar New Year, I've never been more optimistic about Canada's future. We're not out of the woods yet. We need to continue to pull together and be there for each other. But as I announced yesterday, we reached an agreement with the United States to pause the proposed tariffs against Canada, along with our countermeasures, and working together to tackle the scourge of fentanyl. And, of course, we will keep working until those tariffs are off the table altogether. But the one thing that has shone through over the past few days is Canadians being there for their neighbors, for their friends, looking to buy Canadian goods, looking to find Canadian suppliers, looking to be there to support communities right across the country through these challenging times. That is the very best of Canada. We pull together when we're faced with challenges, and that's what we've seen from coast to coast to coast. We are more aligned than ever. We are more united than ever. Le gouvernement fédéral, nos provinces, nos territoires, nos entreprises, nos syndicats et les dizaines de millions de Canadiens d'un océan à l'autre on a tous mis nos différences de côté. On s'est rassemblés
brought
pour le bien
Canadians closer
de notre
together,
pays.
no question.
We've collectively shown that when Canada's interests are in danger, our political identity no longer matters. There is only one team, and that is Team Canada. So as we move forward into the year of the snake, let us commit to fully embracing the values that the Lunar New Year represents. Let us resolve to remain resilient and united. Let us commit to working towards a better, brighter future. And let us recognize the role that you, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese Canadians all play in making Canada the very best country on earth. Merci encore de m'avoir invité à célébrer avec vous ce soir. Je souhaite à vous tous une très belle nouvelle année. Shinyen Kwaila, Sumnin Failok, Chukmun Namoy, Seebok Manibadiseo. Merci beaucoup, mes amis. Thank you.
All right, that will do for that tonight, I think. So as I say, he is right that what Trump has done with this attempt to use these tariffs as a sledgehammer against Canada and Mexico and other countries, but certainly here in Canada. It did bring Canadians closer together. It's also set off it, although I should say it has also driven a wedge, not Trudeau, but Trump. It has driven a wedge a little bit in between Canadians and Americans, which is unfortunate with all the booing going on at sporting events, hockey games, and other events. Now, I'm just going to show you the 338 poll Canada-wide, and I just want to show you this to kind of mark where we're at with everything at this stage in the game. Conservatives, 220, the projected number of seats, which would be a record majority government if the election in Canada were to be held today. The Conservatives have been sitting out there in front for months now with that record lead. And I want to see what happens with the next poll. Because I think what Trump has done here as well is he has unintentionally given the Liberals a boost. Because in Canada, I think that a lot of people see what Trudeau has done here and some others as kind of looking Trump straight in the eye. And it was Trump who backed down. The media trying to spin it the other way, it's really not accurate. Trump didn't get anything from Canada, nothing. The provisions that were announced for the border to combat immigration and the flow of drugs, all that is old stuff. That had been negotiated with the Biden administration a long time ago and then was formally announced way back in December before the tariffs were announced. And then it was Trump that coughed up all this extra money to contribute to the effort. I think it was $225 million. Canada didn't give him anything. Nothing. So Trudeau didn't bend the knee. Ford didn't bend the knee. Team Canada, all these premiers. I'll tell you what it probably really was. The stock market started to crash. And Trump didn't have much choice. These countries that he claims don't matter to the United States matter a great deal. A lot. So it was Trump who backed down, guys. And don't let anybody pull the wool over your eyes in that respect. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu met with Donald Trump today, so let's dive straight into that. High stakes meeting between Donald Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu at the White House. The meeting marks President Trump's first sit-down with the foreign leader since his return to office, setting the stage for discussions that could reshape Middle Eastern dynamics. Benjamin Netanyahu arrived in Washington with a clear agenda to discuss victory over Hamas, the release of all Israeli hostages, and strategies to counter the Iranian terror axis. According to reports from Associated Press, the talks come at a pivotal moment as Netanyahu navigates pressure from his coalition to resume hostilities in Gaza, while war-weary Israelis push for peace and the safe return of hostages. President Trump, on his part, has expressed skepticism about the long-term viability of the current ceasefire in Gaza, stating, in his words, "I have no guarantees that the peace is going to hold." His comments were made as negotiators from both sides are set to resume talks on the next phase of the ceasefire agreement, which includes further hostage releases and discussions on Gaza's future governance. The agenda also includes exploring a potential Israel-Saudi Arabia normalization deal, a topic that has been on the table since Trump's first term. However, this would require significant concessions, including a pathway towards a Palestinian state, which has historically been a contentious issue. Netanyahu's visit isn't just about immediate crisis management. He's also seeking to leverage this meeting to strengthen Israel's position in the region, discussing the expansion of diplomatic ties with Arab countries and addressing Iran's nuclear ambitions. Now, Trump also, during this meeting with all Gazans to be relocated and as he puts it, a patch of land someplace where they can live a beautiful life. Here, I've got the clip, so I'll share that with you.
How many people are you thinking about?
All of them. I mean, we're talking
All of
about
them.
probably 1,000,007 people, 1,000,007, maybe 1,000,008. But I think all of them. I think they'll be resettled in areas where they can live a beautiful life and not be worried about dying every day.
How many?
So, just back to the Trudeau thing and the poll. You know, that was the national poll. I took note today, just something that just popped into my mind. In Ontario, we're going through a snap election because the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, says that he needs any government moving forward right now, given what Trump has done, needs a clear, fresh mandate to deal with the issues effectively. And I saw a poll out today. People are 43% Liberal. I think it was 38% for the PCs, the Conservatives. This is not a shoo-in for Doug Ford at all. Don't kid yourself. It's going to be a tough fight for him, especially now with what's going on with Trump, because I think it's pulling people back over. Some people who are maybe in the middle or undecided. It's liberals who maybe were upset with what's been going on with Trudeau and the federal government coming back to the Liberal Party a little bit in Ontario. So keep an eye on that. And that could serve as something of a bellwether, I think, an indicator of what might happen in the next federal election. Don't count the Liberals out. Don't count Trudeau out. And don't count Canada out either. There's resilience in the country, that's for sure. So yeah, shifting politics. Also, did you see this clip of Trump saying that if he's assassinated by Iran will be obliterated? I'll share that with you. This was kind of an interesting comment, I thought. Is this the clip we want? I believe so, yeah. Here we go.
It's Iran and their proxies who have threatened to retaliate against you and your team by killing you guys for taking out Soleimani.
Well, they haven't done that, and that would be a terrible thing for them to do. Not because of me. If they did that, they would be obliterated. That'd be the end. I've left instructions. If they do it, they get obliterated. There won't be anything left. And they shouldn't be able to do it. And Biden should have said that, but he never did. I don't know why, lack of intelligence, perhaps. But he never said it. If that happens to a leader, or close to a leader, frankly, if you had other people involved also, you would call for total obliteration of a state that did it. That would include Iran. So I'm signing.
Well, sorry we lost our feed there, but we're back on. And I think we've reestablished our connection. I hope we didn't lose all our channels. Is everybody still there? Let me just go over here to the chat. Sorry about that. Are we back? Yeah, we're still live. Okay. Well, I hope we didn't drop off too many of your channels. I hate when that happens. It does happen from time to time. Okay, let me just, what we're going to do now is we'll run a little transition here, and then we'll come back live on the other side, and Mike Pekarek will join us live to talk about the latest developments on the Ukraine file. Stay with me.
Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, I think our guest is in the back room and just about ready to join us, so let's bring Mike Pekarek in right now. There he is. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you today?
I think I caught you in the middle of your dinner.
No, it's all right. I was having a quick protein bar, and that's the way it goes.
Let's check your audio here. You might sound a little bit low. Might need a little more.
How's that?
That is much better.
Okay.
Now we're
Yeah, I redid my mic setup for a different type of recording, and I tried to put it back. Evidently not.
Well, welcome back. It's great
Thanks
to
for
have you
having
here.
me. No.
No, thank you for joining us. We need your perspective because it's been a while, and there has been a lot that has happened since your last visit. Not the least of which is we have a new president in the White House. So, I guess the first thing I'll do is give me your assessment of the first week and what this all means for Ukraine.
Oh, geez. Well, that's a long list. So, I should probably state right out front that I no longer represent a 501c3 NGO due to mainly professional reasons. I need to get along with doing restarting a career after retiring from the military. I had to resign from Ukraine Defense Support. I'm still helping Ukraine. I have frontline soldiers that I directly support with various things, from uniforms to night vision to Toyota 4x4 trucks. Most recently, a fiber optic drone control kit that you control it by a fiber optic cable instead of a radio frequency. So radio frequencies can be jammed, and fiber optic, it's really hard to jam an optical cable. You have to actually find the cable and cut it while the drone's in the air, and good luck with that. I can speak a little bit more freely because my personal opinions will not harm NGO that is doing good work. So President Trump, he's a wild card. He always has been. You don't know which way he's going to jump. Sometimes he doesn't know what way he's going to jump. He recently, just today for the lighter side, I don't know how many people remember Sharpie Gate from the hurricane, where there was a hurricane. He swore up and down that the forecast had it hitting Alabama, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's projection did not have it hitting Alabama. So he pulled up this map and drew a Sharpie extension of their projected. And so the guy that was at NOAA that tried to write a memo excusing Trump taking a Sharpie to a hurricane projection is now been nominated to head the NOAA. So just for the lighter side of just how ridiculous this gets. I don't know if he is necessarily incompetent because he was a career person at NOAA. And I think he was trying to do some damage control. But there's a certain amount of people that are not qualified for their jobs. So that's probably the number one thing that we're looking at right now is people in charge of the Department of Defense, and potentially several other, because Secretary Hegseth was confirmed. He already took the reins. I consider him completely incompetent, possibly dangerous, and possibly a security threat, because anytime you have problems with your personal life, he has numerous. So he has problems with women that he's slept with, as well as alcohol abuse problems. Those are always, when foreign agents are looking to make you theirs, they're looking for those kinds of problems. So in my 22 years in the Air Force, every time I had what is an insider threat, he would ping like 6 or 7 different things on the little thing, like, okay, who in your workplace is potentially an insider threat? And he's got so many problems that he's just ripe for it. I'm not saying he is. I'm just saying that between that and the incompetency and possible and probable fraud that he had at a couple of NGOs, he's a real problem. So we'll see how that goes. There's a lot of really good people in the U.S. military, but at the same time, the president's commander-in-chief. So we'll see how that goes. The U.S. aid thing is a big deal. People don't necessarily get how big of a deal that is. It's widespread. This affects a lot more than Ukraine, but Ukraine in 2023, well, okay. You still there?
Yeah, I just had to cough.
Gotcha. Okay. I'll have to look up this number again because I looked at it last night. But Ukraine has received $16 billion from U.S. aid. I don't know if that was in 2023 or over the past 3 years. But one thing about when a big nation like Russia invades your nation with 300,000 troops and an air force and artillery and rockets and cruise missiles and war crimes and all that kind of stuff, it does a number on your economy, especially when he starts going after civilian targets, and then targets that in a lot of ways are legit, but they make life for civilians difficult, like the power grid is a legitimate target, but that doesn't make it any easier when you've got civilians that don't have power or heat. The American U.S. aid had gone a long way towards helping prop up their economy, especially in the initial stages. It paid for hospitals and police and fire departments to stay open. It paid the salaries. It paid for repairs on the power grid and the water supply. It helped repair buildings that had been damaged, apartment buildings, things like that, roads, railways that have been damaged. It did a lot of just basic stuff, pensions for retired people. I'm a military retired person. I am well aware of how valuable a pension can be. So yeah, the U.S. aid dollars that have been frozen are a big deal. And it's not in comparison to the amount of military aid that we've sent them. It's a fraction. It's maybe, 10%. I'd have to look at the actual numbers because it was changing even up till today, because there's a couple of aid packages for weapons that Trump has approved. But it is important because the civilians matter, the economy matters. It's probably not as existential as it was 2 years ago, but it's still important. Russia's still going after their power grid, after their heating supply, after civilian targets. Hospitals, police, and fire departments still need to run. So we'll see how that goes forward. The thing about U.S. aid that's very important for Trump is that U.S. aid was established by act of Congress. I don't know how many American viewers there are, people familiar with the United States Constitution, but the president cannot get rid of U.S. aid. That's blatantly unconstitutional. We have three branches of government. U.S. aid was established inside of the State Department, which is part of the executive branch. However, it was established by act of Congress, which means that it is U.S. law that U.S. aid exists and U.S. aid does its work. It has a mandate. Congress, it's clearly spelled out in the law that USA will exist and it will do these things, and that's what U.S. law is. The President of the United States does not have the authority to undo that law. The only thing that can undo that is either another act of Congress that undoes the law or a Supreme Court ruling that says that the law is unconstitutional. Since U.S. aid has been in existence since 1961, it started under John F. Kennedy, I really doubt that the Supreme Court's going to say this whole time it's been unconstitutional. But act of Congress, maybe, but that's going to take time because Republicans control both branches of Congress, but you have to draft a bill, you have to debate the bill, you have to move it through Congress. So that's a possibility. But the federal judges that have been receiving some official legal complaints, both from members of Congress and from organizations that were receiving funds, have halted the freeze. The Trump administration tried to play silly games, and they claimed they rescinded the memo that ordered the freezing of funds, but then the White House press secretary in an announcement stated that, yes, the freeze was still ongoing. We just rescinded the memo. And the judges weren't having that. Those kinds of silly games are not going to impress a judge. So yeah, that's kind of where that is. But it's more than Ukraine. It froze, helped HIV positive people in Africa. It froze the ongoing campaign with the polio vaccine to wipe out polio. It's a little difficult for Americans because we've been free from historically raging plagues like smallpox and polio, and we've been free of that for decades. But one of the reasons we stay free is that groups like USAID are overseas in places where polio is still a problem. Places like India and Afghanistan. When I was there for the U.S. military, there were USAID workers helping give polio vaccines to the civilians there to halt an ongoing outbreak of polio. So they do important work. They do important work around the globe. I don't see this going away because a lot of Americans got really mad as soon as they found out what was happening with that one. Maybe they say we have too much aid to foreign nations, but I'm sorry, but things like polio and HIV and things like that are just, they're too important. So we'll see how this goes. There's a lot of legal challenges. Much as Trump might dispute this, he's not a king. And there are still legal recourses for Americans that want to say, hey, yeah, that you can't do that. You just can't.
And so can you clarify where aid for Ukraine is at? Because there's sort of a line between the military aid and humanitarian aid. And I think the humanitarian aid was paused, as part of a larger pause on foreign aid.
The humanitarian aid that I was discussing about repairing the power grid and paying the hospital workers and the firefighters inside Ukraine, that has been halted. Who knows when that'll start back up again. But, well, it's also tied up in the courts because the judge ordered the freeze to freeze. So we'll see if Congress has the moxie to say, look, that's a law that we passed and we have the power of the purse. And yes, that's something that needs to happen. Where the president, it's in his authority to carry out the laws, but it's Congress's job to make the laws. Trump can't make the law. That's unconstitutional.
Now, can I ask about this as well? Zelensky has made comments about not all of the money that was allocated for Ukraine. He says a lot of it actually never made it to Ukraine. We don't really know why. I'm seeing reports that Kash Patel, this new FBI guy, I call him Crazy Eye Guy, he's vowing to investigate this. Where do you see all of that sitting right now, and what impact is this having?
It's different pots of money. So it is true that most of the total amount of money, we're talking both humanitarian that went through things like USAID and the State Department, as well as the military aid that usually that wasn't direct money. Sometimes it was, but usually it was in the form of, here's a Bradley fighting vehicle, here's an Abrams tank, here are spare parts for F-16s. We're going to pay for pilot training for F-16s. That's usually where that money went. Ammunition, all of that was spent inside the United States. All of the work on the Bradleys to get them ready to ship was done inside the United States. So a lot of the money that we earmarked for Ukraine went to pay people in the United States to do the work to send the gear. And then the gear, some of those Bradleys were 40 years old. So how much were they? I mean, they're still obviously effective, but it's just, we're not building something new and giving it to them or authorizing them to buy it. That's just not how this is working. So there's different pots of money. I'd be curious where that actually lands. I am unaware of any of the humanitarian aid that did not make it to Ukraine, because that was far more direct support. fire engines for that. Like I forgot what town in California, might have even been Los Angeles, but they were replacing their fire engines and gave all of the old ones to Ukraine because theirs had gotten blown up. One of the things Russia does is a double tap. They'll hit a civilian bit of infrastructure, make it damaged. The firefighters and paramedics will come, and then they'll double tap it. They'll hit it again while the firefighters and paramedics are there to take out the firefighters and paramedics. It's called a double tap, and in this case, it's another example of a war crime every time it happens. So there are things like that, but it's different pots of money. So I'll be curious how that actually lands. It's Zelensky saying that not all the money made it to Ukraine is an accurate statement. However, it's a complex topic. So when somebody oversimplifies something like what a lot of the Trump people, including Kash Patel, will be doing, that is oversimplification is a real problem. It's either the person oversimplifying it doesn't understand the problem, or they're trying to fool the people that we have daily jobs and stuff like that. We might or might not have been paying attention. We don't know the whole story. And if somebody close to President Trump says something happened, well, they might not look into it. They might actually believe it when it's just technically right, but factually wrong, if that makes sense. It's oversimplified. It's not telling you the story.
And I think it has maybe surprised some people that President Trump is talking about continuing funding for Ukraine.
Yep.
When many people thought that he would just instantly come in and pull the plug.
Well, one of the things that you have to remember about President Trump is that if whatever else he is, whatever else people think he is, he's got a raging ego, a fragile bit of narcissism. He is not overly knowledgeable, but he always wants to be like the smartest person in the room. He famously was, if his national security briefings in his first term didn't include pictures, he famously never read them. So the national security team had to make them full of pictures and no longer than 3 pages. And that's for the leader of the free world, because he doesn't read stuff. So it was a waste of time preparing it and giving it to him because he's not going to read it. So pictures. But he doesn't want to appear weak. There is severe criticism of the treaty that he made that withdrew us from Afghanistan. People blame Biden for that, but they have to remember that the treaty that was actually signed that Biden carried out was from the Trump era. And in February of 2020, good Lord, whole century off. Sorry about that. The Trump administration, first administration, had signed a peace agreement with the Taliban to withdraw American forces from Afghanistan. If you'll notice how I stated that, it was very specific. The United States negotiated with the Taliban. Who is missing from that negotiation?
Afghanistan.
The government of Afghanistan had exactly no part in that peace treaty. So that explains a lot of how that just turned into a complete and utter fiasco. President Biden had the option of either repudiating a signed treaty, which would make America, who knows when the next time we'd be able to negotiate with the Taliban after that would be, or carrying out a really awful treaty. So he had, what do they call that? Hobson's choice, if I remember the correct term, where neither option is good. He did some sort of a middle ground because the treaty said we'd be out by May, and he didn't actually get us out until August and September. He tried to buy some more time. It was still an utter fiasco, but we'll see how this goes with Ukraine. But just remember that is Trump's negotiating style, and he has caught some flack for that. So if he tries to do that with Ukraine, Zelensky's not going to have that. He's going to be very quickly pointing out that if America is just negotiating with Russia, that's going to be a problem, because why would Ukraine surrender? America doesn't have troops in there, but the other side of this is that Trump has continued some weapon shipments. one example. Israel has not been overly helpful to Ukraine. It's not that they haven't helped, they just haven't helped very much. But their Iron Dome system recently was completed. And until that was completed, there was like it's an integrated air defense with 4 different stages. It's got extreme long range, it's got medium range, it's got short range, and then it's got extreme close-up weapons. So there's 4 different layers to their Iron Dome air defense. And before part of the system was in there, we had like 8 Patriot batteries covering that part of their integrated air defense. Those 90 missiles and probably the batteries themselves are heading to Ukraine. The missiles are 100% heading there and might already be there. That's big because each one of those missiles is between $1 and $4 million per missile. So that's kind of a big chunk of aid that President Trump approved. Part of that is Israel no longer needed them. Now with Israel, big cache of Soviet weapons and ammunition that they captured from Hamas and Hezbollah, they are almost certainly going to be sending that to Ukraine. That's actually a big chunk of weaponry.
Interesting comments from Trump saying that he'll continue the support for Ukraine, but he wants something in return, namely, I guess, the some of the resources of Ukraine. Can I get your response?
We'll see how that goes. Ukraine's not in the same position that they were 2 years ago. Rheinmetall opened a factory there for vehicles. Boeing is hiring. One of the Ukrainian kids that I've been mentoring for 3 years, we're working on a resume for him to apply for a job at Boeing inside of Ukraine. So there's defense manufacturing going on. The sheer, completely unrelated to America industry for building drones. When I was in Ukraine in October, I was part of a joint NATO NGO team that our purpose there was to deliver the fiber optic drone kit, but also the design for it, for them to build and acquire parts. We just like, hey, here's a design, go for it. We'll help you improve it. But the, they're both their drone and their anti-drone internal manufacturing process is huge. I visited 38 and I barely struck the surface. I went everywhere from the tiny, this is a dead Russian drone that Special Forces group gave me, but the tiny little quadcopter here, all the way up to, you have wing drones that can fly 200 miles that are homegrown. You have one place that I visited that recently broke secrecy cover is the trombita. Trombita is a Ukrainian form of like an Alp horn, even though it's a little bit different, but that's what it means. It means long horn. They have a pulse jet motor on it. It's got, on the first iteration, it's got 1,000-mile range and a 400 pound payload. That's a big honking drone. And where's the line between cruise missile and drone at that point? So Ukraine is not in the same place they were 2 years ago. They're in more of a position where they can negotiate. One of the reasons Russia wanted those regions that it claims to have annexed is the natural materials there. If because we have this thing with China, one of the reasons Trump wants Greenland is some of the rare earth metals. Canada has them. We have them inside the United States. One of the things that Trump might do in a positive way is undo some of the regulations that have prevented us from going after the rare earth metals inside the United States. But if we can get some sort of, I tangented, I'm so sorry, but if we can get some sort of agreement with Ukraine for mineral rights, that could be important because it could break the Chinese bottleneck on those things. And that was something that Biden was working on with the CHIPS Act and a couple other things. And it's something that Trump continues to work on. It's kind of funny how they change and some of the things just continue, even on people as different as Biden and Trump.
Yeah, lithium is one of the key ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's some others. It has to do with the manufacture of semiconductors and batteries mainly, but that's not the entire thing. Electronics and batteries are probably the two main things right now that are affected. But yeah, it's a big deal. But the thing is that if Ukraine gives some ground on that, then it's going to require Russia to give up some of their currently occupied territory, because that's where the minerals are. Yep. And it's going to be years down the road, because you've got repair work. You're going to have to demine simple things like roadways, just the paths to get to the places that have the rare earth minerals. Somewhere on May or June of 2024, Ukraine became the most landmined nation on the planet. And that's going to take time. They're still digging out unexploded ordnance from World War I, from 1914, in Belgium and France. Some of my American military friends were part of those efforts that went in and took out UXOs and made them safe. There are still farms and roads that inside of all of Europe from both world wars that randomly explode because there's something buried there. So it was a regular thing when I was stationed in Germany that, hey, this intersection's closed for 3 days because we found an American 1,000-pound bomb from World War II that got buried at some point, and now they've got to dig it up and make it safe as they're doing road construction. So that's Ukraine trying to get rid of the millions and millions and millions of unexploded ordnance inside of Ukraine right now is going to be a real hurdle to any sort of mining operation. It's going to be huge. It's going to take decades, and even then we're going to be finding them left and right. So we'll see. It would be a cool agreement, and it would be on paper a win for Trump. He might go for that because it makes him look good, and Ukraine gains as well. So that could potentially be a win-win. I think Zelensky knows that.
We saw Keir Starmer with his 100-year announcement that they're going to stand with Ukraine. What was that? I'm trying to think of what they called it, but it was a pledge basically to Ukraine that they're going to stand behind and stand with Ukraine for 100 years. Does this show that in Europe there's still very strong support for Ukraine?
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness, yes. Certain nations, and this goes all the way back to the whole joining NATO thing that has been part of Russia's lies since, for 10 years at this point, probably longer, all the way back to Putin's, was it 2007 or 2008 Munich speech, where he started those lies, and probably before that too. There's a reason why a lot of, especially Eastern European nations, want to join NATO, is because, especially not just after Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, the 2014 invasion of Ukraine, all the problems in Georgia, the fact that Belarus is basically Putin's meat puppet right now, Azerbaijan, even other places that didn't get a lot of press, but there was a coup in Kyrgyzstan in 2011 that was Russian, because they were too close to the West at that point. They wanted to bring them back inside of orbit. Kazakhstan has been giving Russia problems. That I don't know, people like Kazakhstan, they think of Borat, but Kazakhstan is where Russia's space industry was during the Cold War. That's the Soviet launch. That's their version of Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy, whatever we're calling that nowadays. But Kazakhstan was starting to say, yeah, we're going to have to wind down the Russian lease to launch space rockets from here. And Russia's been building. So there's all sorts of this resistance to Russia going on, even in former Soviet republics, but definitely in Europe. And they, like Estonia, the Baltics, they're not going to have it. Was it Sweden or Denmark that confiscated one of Russia's ghost fleet that had dragged an anchor and busted an undersea cable? But that was a couple of weeks ago, where they confiscated the freighter. And that's not the only one. There's been 3 others that Baltic Sea nations have confiscated. So yeah, they're not having it. I will state that NATO NGO team that I was part of in October was part of an entire 12-month effort starting in December 23 or January 24, where Europe was literally explicitly trying to Trump-proof support for Ukraine. And that was part of when I was saying I was going to drone and anti-drone manufacturers, part of our job was not just giving them this fiber optic design, that was how to open the door and get them to talk to us. What our main purpose is getting Ukrainian, they're small manufacturers, they've got 10,000, and that might be an undercount, of people making anywhere from 100 to 1,000 or more drones every single month, and they've got 10,000 of those spread out through all the country. The problem with this, the advantage is that, of course, they can innovate. Each one can innovate, and you can get all sorts of designs. And there's a lot of smart people and really great engineers inside of Ukraine, and they've come up with some really slick designs. So the problem, though, is that Ukraine lived under Soviet and then before that Russian oppression for a long time. And so hardwired into their culture is the concept that was learned from hard lessons, bloodshed and death and all that kind of stuff, that if you speak to your neighbors, it could get you arrested or killed. So Ukraine does not like talking to each other about important stuff. They're an incredibly friendly country, but when it comes to like, this is my drone design, they're not going to talk about it. So part of our thing was, can we get some collaboration going? You guys don't need to be worried about it. You need to defend your nation. So can this one design go to multiple places? Can maybe we take the best from yours and maybe somebody else can start using it, even if it's licensed and they pay you, that was part of the deal, is getting manufacturers inside of Ukraine to collaborate better. That was part of Rheinmetall opening their armored vehicle, both new manufacturing, especially for Lynx and Leopard 2 tanks, and then their new version that I can't remember the name, but also to repair the vehicles like the Gepards and the Lynx that they already have. Martyrs, all of those German armored vehicles that Ukraine has been using. So this was a concerted effort to get that inside of Ukraine, to get that tied up in European control. The pilot training was transferred to European control sometime in the second half of 2024. Got the Americans out of it. So there's all sorts of this kind of thing going on inside of Europe where they saw Russian invading. That's something they haven't seen since 1938, when the Nazis went into Austria and into Czechoslovakia. And this is after they retook the Ruhr Valley. And Europe's not having it. They still have living memory of this happening, and they're not interested in a repeat. So yeah, the 100-year support for Ukraine, that's a big deal inside of Europe. They're not gonna stop.
And just to come back to what Trump is saying about wanting access to the rare earth minerals, the United States has obviously put up a lot of money, the bulk of the money, to support Ukraine through this.
Roughly half, but that changes. So yeah.
And a lot of that has come back to the defense industry itself.
Yes.
It has employed Americans and Canadians to some degree, a much lesser degree. But if they cut funding now, if Russia wins this war, then all that money basically is lost. You'll get nothing. So do you think that's a big factor for Trump moving forward, like to make sure that there's some return, and I hate to put it in this way, but a return on the investment?
This is very much worth talking about because of the lies that Russia has put out and some American conservatives have put out. It's very much worth talking about. And this is not unusual in history too, because we talk about the Great Recession in the 1930s that kind of sort of got fixed with the New Deal and a few other things, but really didn't get completely fixed until the massive wartime spending that started really in 1939, but didn't really hit its gear until 1942. that's a little bit loosey goosey because there were the various naval expansion acts that I think like 1933, 1936, 1938, 1939, and 1941. And those were all before Pearl Harbor. So there was massive military spending even before that. And that is probably the bulk of how we got out of the Great Recession. So talking about military spending and the economic benefits is something that historians do, and it's a worthy topic, and it's real. So don't ignore it. The American military, we had a peacetime post-Cold War. We hadn't really built up our ability to fight a peer nation. We had done some modernizing work starting in 2014, but that is fresh designs, stuff that is multi-year process to do. What happened in 2022, we all of a sudden found out that very basic things like a dumb artillery shell, or rifle ammunition, or rocket motors, or just simple things like basic explosives production. One of the weird things that I found out is that in 1989, the United States ceased producing TNT, dynamite, inside of the United States. All of the dynamite that we used since then was produced somewhere else. Maybe Canada, maybe Mexico. I'm not actually sure. But Joe Biden restarted dynamite production inside of the United States either in late 23 or early 24. That's one of the very basic starting points that they will then go through further chemical processes to produce the propellant for artillery shells. But you need TNT as one of the basic ingredients to get there. So that thing started. We're bulking out our supply stores. We still have to finish doing that because we and a lot of European nations raided our cupboards and we're going to get to a very bare minimum for the U.S. military's like emergency needs, and we're going to send everything else, and then we're going to ramp up production. So we've done that. We continue to do that. Hopefully Trump will continue to do that because they're in places like Mesquite, Texas, is a new 155 millimeter artillery shell production plant. The dynamite, I believe, is in Alabama. One of the huge expansions that happened for ammunition production was in southern Illinois, about an hour and a half south of where I am, in one of the reddest districts in the nation. So if you are following those locations and are familiar with American politics, all of that expansion, all of those new jobs, all of that money was pouring into districts that voted for Trump. So if he stops doing that, all of a sudden a lot of jobs in Trump districts are going to evaporate under Trump. I don't know if Trump knows this because, like I mentioned, he doesn't read. But his advisors know this, and his campaign staff and his chief of staff will know this. And they will tell him that he can't do that. So that side of it's going to continue. There's some various innovations that didn't really hit the news under President Biden. Part of that is President Biden was notoriously awful at bragging about what he had accomplished. He just didn't do it. I don't know if he thought it was unseemly, or I don't know what the story was. It was stupid. I will say President Biden was very stupid about not bragging about what he did. But there is an innovation on the production of rocket motors. That covers everything from basic HIMARS rockets to air-to-air missiles for F-16s and F-22s and F-35s to hypersonics, all of those missiles that we shot off against the Houthis. There is a new process for 3D printing that not only does it faster, but they figured out a way to get twice the amount of energy stored in the same space, which is huge. If you know anything about how missiles work inside of warfare, if you can get twice the energy content into the same package, then not only will your maximum range go up, but if you're talking about a guided missile, there's something called a no escape zone, where that's entirely dependent on what energy that the missile has when it gets launched. So that no escape zone gets, and just because there's somebody innovated a process. Trump can brag about that if he chooses to. I don't care. He can own that if he wants to, as long as it happens. So yeah, there's all sorts of things inside of America. The shipbuilding stuff that has been going on to counter China. All sorts of opportunities for Donald Trump to expand, create jobs, build infrastructure, and claim all of that as President Trump's win. Hopefully he does that. Joe Biden set him up to do that. So we'll see if it actually happens.
And speaking of drones and long-range weapons, we've seen a lot of strikes deep inside Russia against energy facilities.
There were at least 25 of them in January 2025 alone. I mentioned double tap is not an uncommon phrase in military things. I mentioned it in the context of war crimes inside of Ukraine going after civilian infrastructure. But one of the things that Ukraine started doing, they've had an ongoing campaign against Russian oil and ammunition supply for at least the last 12 months. As their longer range drones started coming online, they started using them. The ammunition is obvious. There was that huge, almost nuclear level explosion, kiloton range explosion that happened west of Moscow. What was that, 6 months ago, sometime last fall? That was huge and it has obvious benefits. That one set of like 30 explosions, it was all in the same ammunition storage site, estimated to eat up 3 months of Russian ammunition supplies. That is not a small strike. If you eat up 3 months of the entire nation's ammunition supplies, that's a huge, huge strike. But Ukraine has been smarter than just going after the ammunition. Russia pre-war, pre-2022, their main cash exports, because Russia's economy is not good, and so they relied on exports for most of their money. The vast majority of their economy's money came from exports. Pre-war, it was about half and half weapons and oil, petroleum products, with a little bit of grain as kind of a distant third. So like 40-40-20 on the weapons, oil, and grain. The weapons have almost dried up because it's obvious that either Russia doesn't know how to use their weapons or their weapons are just bad. And so nobody's buying. Russia has been giving away weapons to North Korea. They've tried to give them to India. India's not having it. The Chinese have developed their own industry and technology streams for jet engines and radars at the bare minimum. And so they're not buying Russia's weapons either. What was remaining was the oil. And Ukraine has now degraded or destroyed at least 25% of Russia's oil production capacity, which again is huge. That's their cash crop. So it's been very smart, and it's been very targeted. They've been going after refining capacity, which is a smart thing because you can get the oil out of the ground, but if you can't refine it, what good is it going to do you? That would make Russia, in order to use it in their tanks or their vehicles or their trains or their factories or their power plants, they would have to import the refined petroleum products. They can try and export the crude, but they can't make their own refined products to use. So this is very smart. Like I said about that 1,000-mile, is it a cruise missile? Is it a drone? They started using those in December. That's when I saw it break cover. Yeah, so Ukraine's been going after Russia hard. I'm not even going to say that Russia has been winning this war. I think that is a vast overstatement. They're still gaining ground. But I don't know when the last time you looked at a map or did the math. But if Russia continues to gain ground inside of Ukraine at the rate that they have done over the last 12 months, it will take them 104 years to conquer Ukraine. So are they winning?
Yeah, and if you look at the attacks on the oil refineries, the shutdown of the pipelines supplying Europe, that revenue's now been cut to Russia. plus them squeezing the shadow fleet, which was being used to transport Russian oil to the international market in a sort of a gray market way.
Mostly India and China. And India and China also stopped allowing the Russian tankers to either dock or unload. Part of that was in late 2024, the Biden administration finally got off their butts, stopped dithering, stopped, navel gazing, and actually went after the shadow fleet. And one of the new sanctions was nobody could pay for the oil. If Russia's willing to give it away, then they can unload the oil, but the international markets, they're not allowed to pay for it.
It seemed like the Biden administration didn't get really serious about all of this until near the end of their time in the White House. That's the sense that I got. They really seemed to ramp things up right at the end. I guess there must be various reasons for that. Do you have any insight?
My guess, they did a lot of dithering. There's going to be a lot to unpack for what the Biden administration did and didn't do. They had a lot of victories. They had a lot to say, I did this. Uniting NATO was a big one. Getting some of the major weapons in there was a big one, especially the Bradleys. But they did a lot wrong. They dithered, they delayed. The pilot training should have started a year before it actually did. I kind of get some of the reasons why they did it, but here we are. Towards the end, I think they were trying to do what Europe had been doing for the previous years. They were trying to Trump-proof the aid. They were trying to get it to a situation where Ukraine had a lot more advantages at the very beginning of the Trump administration than they otherwise could have. That's my personal opinion for why they finally got off their butts and started doing more of what they probably should have done a year or two earlier.
And speaking of those F-16s, how much of a difference have they made? I see that there's some talk of a pilot shooting down a record number of cruise missiles, so it looks like they've been saving some lives.
Yeah, it's been underreported, but part of that is people, ever since the start, they've been overstating this is going to be a game-changing weapon. Well, that's not how it works. So the F-16s are an important part. So were the Bradleys, so were the HIMARS, so were the basic artillery cannons, so was rifle ammunition, or getting basic military training for raw recruits moved outside of Ukraine. So there's all sorts of things that were just basic, and all of it put together might be game-changing, but any one system is not going to be. The F-16s were, and I think I've stated this on your program before, were an iterative process to building. I mentioned Israel's Iron Dome is a at least 4-level integrated air defense that's centrally controlled, computerized, and the targets are prioritized, all that kind of stuff, and the weapons assigned so you don't shoot 2 weapons at the same target. The integrated air defense that we've been building inside of Ukraine is NASAMS controlled, NASAMS. That system was specifically developed to utilize F-16s via data link and ground control vectoring. So one of the reasons why the F-16s were a big deal is that they linked into the integrated air defense that we had been building inside of Ukraine. So the F-16s through data link can take advantage of all of the ground-based radars. There are several hundred ground-based radars that are mobile and move and all that kind of stuff. They can take advantage of the different layers. Like, we don't have to go after all of the targets, because that Gepard is taking care of that. The Patriot battery is taking care of that. Various systems. They even have some old upgraded S-300s that are now Franken systems, that they're old Russian S-300s shooting Western missiles. So the F-16s were a big part of that. That thing that you mentioned, there was the thing that the F-16 would excel at, because it takes money per flight hour, and the weapons on it are varying degrees of expensive. But the cruise missiles that Russia shoots are probably their most sophisticated weapon, at least that they can shoot in any sort of tactically useful number. So they've got cruise missiles similar to the American Tomahawk that they can shoot several dozen a night. So that's a big deal versus like their whatever that weird multiple re-entry vehicle thing that they might have had 3 total missiles. They can shoot.
Orashnik, yeah.
Yeah, they can shoot dozens of these cruise missiles every night, and the F-16s have been going after the cruise missiles. There's been some innovation on that area. There is, I'm sure people have seen these little round things, especially on helicopters. Yeah, you got the
These
picture
things?
right
Yeah.
there. Yeah, where you can do, these are multiple rocket launchers. They're very cheap. They're maybe $15,000 or $20,000 a round. That's very comparable to a single artillery round. And this compares to like a Sidewinder missile that's $500,000 to $1 million, an AMRAAM missile that's more than $1 million. I mentioned some of the Patriot missiles go all the way up to $4 million per missile. So at $20,000 per rocket here, they had been upgraded sometime in the last 10 years, starting in 2014 when Obama started remodernizing the American military. They added laser guidance to these tiny little rockets. And the laser guidance on the F-16s, they've been using them, and it's not just F-16s. Ukrainian helicopters have been using them. They've even mounted single ones of those pods on the larger winged drones that they've been making. Drones that are going after Russian drones is a big thing, especially the last 6 months. But these are on F-16s. They've been using them to go after Russian cruise missiles, and those Russian cruise missiles are $1 million per, roughly, similar to Tomahawks in price. And one F-16 sometime in December shot down 6 of them in one night using things like that. They might have used a Sidewinder, but they might have used all of these.
So they call these advanced precision kill weapon systems, and I guess what they do is they paint the target with a laser and turn what is essentially a conventional kind of a dumb weapon into a smart weapon.
Yep,
Is that
into a precision weapon, yes.
Yeah.
And it's that article that I had sent to you, they're going to add an infrared seeker head to it to make it into a tiny little Sidewinder. But yeah, no, it's a big innovation. Ukraine's been using it to great effect. And one of the things that it never got said, but if you're using a laser guided weapon that you are launching and targeting from an F-16, that means the F-16 has a laser designator on the jet. This is the older version of that is a lantern pod. They have a newer version of it. But what this means is that Ukrainian F-16s at a bare minimum have a lantern pod. One of the guesses that we had for what equipment Ukrainian F-16s had is we didn't know what kind of targeting pods they had. Best guess is they were going to have the harm targeting pod, the HTS pod, and the now that we know that we have a laser designator from an F-16, we know they have at least a 20-year-old lantern pod.
So here's some video. I think this is, if correct me if I'm wrong, video of a drone
like a
being shot
Shaheed.
down.
That's a Shaheed.
Прийняв. Ціль вражена.
And a Shaheed's down.
Ціль знищена. Ціль знищена.
And it looks like a video game, but that's very real.
Well, funny you say that. I mentioned they had all those radars, a couple hundred radars spread around the nation. They also have acoustic sensing. You showed the Shaheed getting shot down. The Shaheed has a 2-stroke engine that we might be familiar with from lawnmowers or mopeds. And if you put one of those two-stroke engines inside of an aerial drone, there's nothing else on the planet that makes that noise. What that means is anybody with a microphone and a tablet or even a phone could be spread out through the entire nation with acoustic sensors. So you've got thousands of acoustic sensors that if you get at least 2, but potentially at least a minimum of 3, but you've got thousands, where you can triangulate based on how strong the acoustic signature is, and they track the Shahed drones acoustically. And they use phones and iPads for these controller things. If you think about it, if you have to take a whole bunch of civilians and make them into military members like Ukraine's had to do, how do you make them effective the fastest? So you've got an entire generation of people that grew up with video games. So they're using Switch controllers, they're using Xbox controllers. So all of these video game controlling consoles are being used to control weapons inside of Ukraine. And it just makes sense. If you've got recruits that are familiar with how to play a video game using these controllers, why not? Because it reduces the training time by just months and months and months if they already know how to do the controls.
It gives you a glimpse into what the future of warfare is going to look like.
And if you think about if the United States or Canada had to all of a sudden fight a big war, say with China, and we had to put millions of people into uniform very quickly, what kind of innovations would we use? The video game controllers for high-tech weaponry that's low-hanging fruit. So it's an obvious choice. And so, yeah, you mentioned it's like a video game, but yeah, it's literally using video game gear to control weapons.
Amazing. Let's take a little break, and we'll come back on the other side and continue our conversation with Mike Pekarek.
You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on Earth.
The entire world is watching.
Every dictator, every crazy dictator in the world is watching. The world is watching. On TV, the entire world is watching. On social media.
But the entire world is watching, and yes, they are seeing what we have apparently bravely been willing to say that others are thinking.
Stand for freedom. Literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. The entire world is watching.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Maverick News. Maverick News. Maverick News.
Let me have more control of my own destiny.
The world is watching.
Maverick News. Expose lies and tell truth. The world is watching.
Okay,
Sorry, I was doing something else.
Oh, that's okay. So, there's also footage out there right now of what appears to be, see if I can find it here. Yeah, I've got it right here. Russians digging mass graves near.
That's a pretty heavy topic.
Let's
hit that in 1 second. I want to circle back to the economic conversation. So I talked about missile prices and these $20,000 tiny little rockets going after $1 million cruise missiles is kind of a big deal. The economics of this is something that America and Europe and NATO has had to think really hard about, because we have all these incredibly capable weapons, but at like some of the missiles that we used to shoot down Iranian and Houthi stuff, they were like $1 million a pop, right? Or even more. Some of those standard missiles that we shot off of the Burke destroyers in the Red Sea were not cheap. Patriot missiles are not cheap. So the question is how can we sustain this? That manufacturing process for rocket motors is kind of a big deal. That'll lower the cost and increase the speed of production. But the other aspect that we're looking at is, can we make weapons that are less expensive that do the job? And that's what that multiple rocket launcher was doing. There's all sorts of economics involved in this in terms of how do we produce things, who's making the money, that we covered already. But one of the things that we have to look at is what is the cost of letting the Russian munitions through, or the Houthi or Iranian munitions through. What is the destruction in the building? How much does it take to repair the building if we let the missile through? We don't use $1 million Patriot to shoot it down, but now you've got an apartment building that was 15 stories, and you're going to have to spend $100 million to rebuild it. So what's the cost of that? But then I'd like to say 10 or even 20 years ago, I read a study that if a human being grows up and then does 40 years of adult life at minimum wage, that is roughly $7 million of economic activity, even back then, even 20 years ago. So this is the grisly process of trying to put a dollar value on a human life. What is, if that apartment building gets hit and a dozen people die, how much is that worth? And so when you're talking about the cost, you have to consider not just the cost of the munition that you're shooting in an attack situation like a cruise missile, the munitions you're using to shoot the cruise missile down. The flight hours on the F-16 jet is going to be about $24,000 per flight hour. And like I said, an AMRAAM could be $1.5 million. Sidewinder could be $1 million. So what are these costs, and how do you actually weigh that? But what people sometimes leave out of this equation is the damage on the other end, both in terms of things that are destroyed if you let the munition through, and the physical objects and buildings that are destroyed, as well as the human beings that lost their lives. So spending $1 million on a Patriot missile to prevent the loss of a $50 million building and 12 lives, well, the math suddenly changed a whole lot, because you're spending $1 million to prevent having to spend $100 million. So just putting that out there on what are these weapons actually worth and what is the actual value. But now, speaking of the value of human life, let's talk about how Russia is not valuing their own soldiers.
Yeah, so this footage, I'll bring this up here. This is near, I guess, Donetsk, we're told, or at least that's what's indicated.
They had geolocated it into the Donetsk region, yes.
Okay. And so I'll run a little bit of this now.
You putting audio on it, or are we talking?
No, I'm going to take the audio off.
Gotcha. So this is, these are mass graves that a Russian soldier, the original video, the Russian soldier couldn't stay up on YouTube because the Russian soldier that's filming this is so mad that like every other word is harsh language that can't be translated and is not suitable for children. But he's talking about his colleagues being buried in mass graves, and the reason why they are doing this and not advertising it is that all of the Russian soldiers that are going into these mass graves are listed as missing in action. What that means is that Russia has a thing where if a soldier is killed on the battlefield, there is a death gratuity that is paid to its family. And if they are buried in a mass grave and listed as missing in action, that is money that the Russian government does not have to pay the families of the Russian soldiers. So this is, I don't know how to say which direction this is more heinous in, but that shows that they obviously don't care about their soldiers. They don't care about properly accounting for the sacrifice that the Russian soldiers are making. It doesn't help the families out. It's mass graves for your soldiers, just burying them, not marking them. What does that say? When you treat your soldiers like this, how does this affect the soldiers that have to fight yet today? It's kind of a big deal. And it's starting to get out. There's a lot of Russian mill bloggers that are starting to talk about this sort of thing. They used to be all rah, go after Ukraine. Now there's a lot of Russian mill bloggers that are not thrilled. And things like this are the reason. One of the things that needs to bear talking about, because people are like, Russia's gaining ground. There's a reason why they're gaining ground now, but Ukraine's getting smarter. So this is the whole dance that attack and defense does throughout military history, human history of military conflict. The Russians are doing their meat wave assaults. They'll send a whole bunch of people across a field, hundreds of them. What this does, it'll chew them up and they'll die. Like lately, they've been sending Russians out on crutches. There's videos of the crutch armies now. People that are limping, people that are wounded. North Koreans have been caught up in these meat wave assaults. They go across the field, and the Ukrainians, because they can't let them through, so the Ukrainians are shooting back. They're just mowing them down by the dozens, sometimes by the hundreds. But what this does is that they have better trained Russian soldiers that are watching. So you've got this meat wave that's getting chewed up by Ukrainian ammunition, but you've got Russian soldiers watching, like, okay, there's a machine gun there. There's a couple of riflemen there. There's maybe a Stugna anti-tank missile team there. They probably have a spotter there. So Russia is taking notes, and then they'll send like small 2 or 3 man teams through the tree lines and stuff like that. And that's how they've been gaining ground. Ukraine has been getting smarter. And speaking of drone innovations, because Ukraine was never able to achieve in 2023 a combined arms attack mainly because they lacked air support. They didn't have air superiority. F-16s have started to change that, but so have their drone innovations, and things like the fiber optic drone has been big. But one thing they don't remember is that the aerial drones are not the only things that you can remotely control. There have been recent Ukrainian attacks that included a small lawnmower-sized drone that mounts a machine gun, but it's armored. So it's like a tiny little machine gun tank that's remotely controlled that goes across the field, right? So Ukraine's been getting smarter on the defense, where their defensive positions are remotely controlled. So even though Russia's like, there's a machine gun right there, well, there are no Ukrainian soldiers there. So Russia might try and take it out, but it's a remotely controlled position that the Ukrainians, there's nobody there. So there's a reason why the complete imbalance on soldier casualties is 7-1, 10-1, 11-1, and it's huge. Is the meat wave assaults, but then Ukraine got smarter and their defensive positions don't have any Ukrainian soldiers there. So it's this whole dance of attack, defense, and figuring each other out, where Russia eventually figured out how to do that with watching for the Ukrainian positions. Then the Ukrainians figured out, well, maybe we'll remotely control our positions and we'll watch for these smarter flanking attacks that are actually gaining the ground. So, yeah, there's a reason why in the south, in this direction, in the Donetsk direction, where we saw these mass graves, Russia, they conquered Avdiivka, the city of Avdiivka, I'd like to say March or April of last year, probably April if my memory serves. That's about 35 miles from Pokrovsk. So over the last 10-ish months, they've been trying to go 30 miles and they're not there yet. So how many miles is that per month? They might be advancing a mile and a half per month. That's the rate that Russia's advancing. Well, I believe if the United States has been advancing in this kind of fashion somebody would get fired. The American people would not tolerate that. So that's the situation that Russia's in.
Yeah, and with casualties mounting 600,000, 800,000, I don't know, a million.
The high estimates of Russia, because Russia's not talking, and obviously they're hiding it from their own people. I don't know if you saw how many of those trenches were in that video, but each one of those trenches holds a couple of hundred dead Russian soldiers. According to the official "This is how you dig a mass grave" pamphlet that Russian army has been distributing the last few months. But they're not telling their own people. They're not advertising it. But the low range estimate for Russian casualties is 600,000. The high range estimate is double that, 1.2 million.
So how much pressure does this put on Putin?
A lot. The home front? He's running out of people. People were saying that, well, why are the North Koreans doing this? Well, he's running out of people. There is a bottom edge for what Russia can mobilize and still have an economy, even if he strips the entire economy, and the only parts of the economy that work are the ones that are supporting the war effort. There is a floor to how many people Russia can put into their military. And they've been trying to get around. Yeah, there's one of the diagrams. This is official Russian instructions for how to, and then they're listed as missing in action. So all sorts of the fun parts of the war. This is Russia at war right here. How do we dig mass graves for our own people?
And just to be clear for people, this is not happening inside Russia proper. This is happening near,
And one of the reasons they're doing this in Donetsk is that one of the reasons why the Soviets had to give up in Afghanistan in the 1980s is the mothers of Soviet soldiers that are like, what's going on? So this means that they're listed as missing in action rather than killed. The cemeteries inside of Russia are not expanding. So there's not that visual reminder that all of a sudden the cemetery in my town just tripled in size because of all the war casualties. I don't know how to put this other than it's gross.
So Putin's not in the position of strength that he would like the world to believe. Yeah.
His oil is falling apart. His weapon sales already fell apart. The smallest demographic inside of Russia was military-aged males. He's been trying to skirt that with like 65-year-old men getting conscripted. But there's only so many choices. 1 million Russians fled the nation when conscription started. I don't know if people remember that from a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. But they're military-aged males. That's roughly 18 to 45 is roughly the count here. The estimate was there were no more than 10 or 12 million inside of Russia. And if you've already chewed up 1 million of those, but then you still need to run your factories and your farms, your police, all of the trains need to run on time. You still need to do water and sewer and all the rest of that, the tech industry. Their Navy still has to have people in it. We can talk about that too. Because they've been robbing their Navy. There's a bottom floor to what Russia can do. That's the reason why they're getting Iranians and people from, Iranians are not. Indians is what I meant to say. They're trying to get Chinese, North Koreans. They're trying to get people out of Africa and Central America to join the Russian military with the promise of money. Obviously, the death benefits are not getting paid if you're now in a mass grave and listed as missing in action. I don't know if people remember their one sole carrier that was just a basket case, the Admiral Kuznetsov, the one Russian aircraft carrier, but it hasn't put to sea since 2018. It'll never put to sea again, I can't imagine. But the entire crew of their aircraft carrier was pulled and sent as infantry to try and repel Ukraine's advances into Kursk. So the only Russian aircraft carrier no longer even has a crew because they're infantry now. And that's been happening to the rest of their Navy as well. They've been trying to shuffle the deck as much as they can. They've been getting creative on any number of ways, trying to get more people for the slaughter. And yeah, they're at the start of the war, Russia was 144 million and Ukraine was roughly 45 million. People have left both nations since then, but if Russia is losing anywhere from 7 to 12 people for every Ukrainian that is lost, that's not sustainable, because Russia is not 7 to 12 times as big as Ukraine. So here we are.
And Ukraine is looking to possibly lower the conscription age?
That's one of the things that's up. Ukraine, at the start of the war, was trying to, because they have the same math that any nation going to war does. Because, yeah, you need to have soldiers, but you need to have people that are still doing the jobs back home. World War II, Rosie the Riveter became a big famous thing. So worldwide, women started working in factories where they hadn't before. There's a whole bunch of math going on here. One of the things that Ukraine was doing for various reasons, both for education and young men and women, because Ukraine's been using women as well to build their professional chops and possibly a career, is that their lower end of conscription was 28 years old. They've had volunteers younger than that. Some of my friends, they're older than 28 now, but they were 25 when this kicked off and they decided to be full-time soldiers. But the age of Ukrainian conscription of 28 is significantly different than the American 18. I'm not familiar with what Canada does. But most basic trainees in the United States are 18 years old. They're going to get older people that are looking for a job, but 18 is the vast majority of basic trainees. The benefit for this, for Ukraine, is that it not only allowed young people to get educated, but also to have babies. So Ukraine has been thinking long-term since the start. That hopefully by the time they're 28, they're going to have a couple of babies. Now, can they bring that down a little bit? I think they have to, because Ukraine, like I said, for 3 years, and even if they're only losing 1 to every 12 Russian soldiers, that's a huge toll on a small nation that's roughly the size of Canada. If Canada can imagine losing 500,000 people, to both death and wounding, that's a big thing. So can they lower the conscription age? The benefit this would have is that younger people, they recover faster physically. They're more able to take the training and then recover, and they'll be fit to fight more sooner after an exertion. Anybody that's aged knows how that math goes. It takes me 3 days to recover from something that it used to take me maybe 12 hours to recover from. And since I was active duty military into my 50s, I'm well aware of how that equation changed over 22 years. But if you lower the conscription age from 28 down to, say, 25 or even 22, you're still going to get people into school and into higher level training programs that they're going to be skilled. But then you're going to have this big pool of people that is younger and more healthy, more able to take the punishments of a combat environment. Certainly better than my 45-year-old friend that's on the front line right now.
So let's talk a little bit about peace, or at least peace talks. It seems to have been pushed to the back burner already. Trump said that he would end this war within a day.
Mm-hmm.
Blah blah blah. It kept moving the goalposts. Then it was,
which was always BS.
Yeah,
if I can say that on your program.
Yes, yeah. Now it's 100 days, and he's not even talking about that now. What do you think is really happening here? Does Putin even want to come to the table? It doesn't seem like it.
Well, Putin never wanted to come to the table because he was never willing to give up anything that would actually be acceptable to the Ukrainians. And like I said, the rate of Russian advance, it would take Russia 140 years to conquer Ukraine, 104 years, I'm sorry. So what kind of situation is Putin in? But he still holds ground, even though the Ukrainians are in Kursk and Ukraine's reaching 1,200 miles into Russia to destroy things. Trump did appoint a negotiator. I'd like to say the name is Kellogg, but that is, yeah, I might be wrong on that one. But he has appointed a negotiator for the Ukraine conflict specifically. How far he's going, I don't know. From what Zelensky has been saying, there's at least been the beginnings of what would Ukraine actually be willing to accept. What we might hear out of Russia, I don't know. But like I said, since the start, Putin has not been willing to give anything that Ukraine would accept. So, Trump is not at war. There are no American troops on the ground. We have troops in the area. We have intelligence, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So we have ISR assets that have been outside of the combat zone, like over the Black Sea and over Romania and over Poland. Since day one, we've had ISR assets keeping a watch on this. But there's no American troops on the ground. Some of the gear that we've been giving is really old. The ATACMS are a 1980s design. We did not give Ukraine any ATACMS missile until the replacement for the ATACMS had already reached operational service in the U.S. Army. So that's not even the frontline weapon of the United States Army anymore. So we gave them Bradleys that are 20, 30, 40 years old because those started building in the 80s. Even older, the M113 armored personnel carrier that dates back to the 1961, maybe even the late 50s is when that design came from. They've received those by the hundreds. So it's not like Trump is in the strongest negotiating position here. So I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know why he even thought that would say it. Like I said, maybe it's just because he doesn't read, pictures. Yeah, good luck to him. If he can end it on a sort of negotiation that Ukraine would accept, then I am happy to give him the win. I would be happy to congratulate him, and I would be happy to sing his praises if he can get it to end on something that's acceptable to the Ukrainians.
He certainly seemed to change his tune very quickly once settling back into the White House. Why do you think that happened?
Part of it is he no longer had to win votes. He actually has to do the job, so the calculus has changed. He can be outside of power and the one not calling the shots, and he's in the peanut gallery just criticizing somebody else that's doing the job. And he can say whatever he wants, and it doesn't really matter. But now that he's actually in the job, he owns the results. And I think even he understands this as a very basic level because, like I said, he wants to be praised. He wants to be seen as the strong person, as the smart person, as the person that gets stuff done. If he doesn't get stuff done, if he's not strong, if it looks like he surrenders like he did in Afghanistan, he knows that this is on him. So if Ukraine falls, if Russia takes over Ukraine and Trump was the person that made that happen, well, what are people going to be thinking of Trump? So yeah, as soon as he took the job, he has to start thinking in those frameworks. And he can't give up on Ukraine. That's just not going to be something that's acceptable even to his own base. I mean, there's always going to be those sycophants for Trump that are gonna, whatever he does is fantastic. But one other thing to keep in mind that I think Trump even knows is that he didn't win a majority of the popular vote. I don't know if that got any press, but Trump got 49.8% of the vote. That means that he has never won the popular vote. and that a majority of Americans in both elections that he won the Electoral College voted against him. So he knows that. He's got his rabid support. There's probably 30 to 40% of the American voters that would accept whatever he does, but that's not enough to go forward with. That's not enough to keep Congress. That's not enough to do whatever he wants to do. So yeah, his calculus changed a great deal as soon as he took the job.
I think his calculus was way off on the way these tariffs were going to impact various parts of the economy. The stock market started to crash this week when it looked like the tariffs were going to hit Canada and Mexico. These actions that he's been taking on this front, what's this doing to international relations and even the cohesiveness of NATO and European countries?
So one of the huge successes of President Biden was that he restored America's place in the world after Trump in his first term did a whole lot of stuff to tear it down. Biden did not do as good of a job as he should have, both because he dithered on a lot of things and he didn't brag about other things. And so Biden should have done a better job than he did, but he was very successful in reuniting NATO and reuniting the West, both against Russia and against China. And for that matter, against Iran. Whatever we might think of that now, what is it, a decade-old Iranian nuclear treaty that Trump, speaking of destroying America's ability to be taken seriously at the negotiating table, when we backed out of that Iranian nuclear treaty, when Trump took us out of that, all of a sudden America can't be trusted at the negotiating table anymore. So he made an enemy out of Iran. That even the moderates in Iran don't trust America. So there's a reason why Iran is such a strong enemy right now, and it's all Trump's fault. But now that's water under the bridge. It's a decade old. We have to deal with the Iran that we're dealing with now. We'll see what Trump does. Blowing up negotiations with your two closest trade partners in Canada and Mexico's kind of dumb. Whatever problems Canada has, you never spent your 2% on your military budget, which means that Canada has not been meeting its treaty obligations for defense. And Trump was screaming at you in the first term, but he just said it louder and more publicly and a lot harsher than what Obama and President Bush had been saying for the last 20 years and what Biden was saying for 4 years. Canada, you actually have to fulfill your treaty obligations. So does Trump have a point in going after Canada? Yeah. Is what he's doing now stupid? Yeah. Did the heads of Mexico and Canada get the better of Trump? Yeah. I don't know how that's being reported in Canada. That link that I sent about the thing that got the tariffs delayed was Trudeau promising to do what Canada had promised to do already. And Mexico was the same thing, but Mexico even got a concession from Trump, which is funny. Mexico just said, yeah, we're going to do what we're already promised to do, but you're going to have to do something for us if you're going to declare the cartels as enemy terrorist organizations. Well, American guns illegally crossing the border into Mexico is what has been arming the cartels. The cartels were armed by the United States of America because of our inability to control guns. And Mexicans know this. A lot of Americans know this. I don't know if that permeated up to Canada or not. But Mexico won a concession for Trump that Trump's now going to halt the smuggling of guns, or at least try to. That's a little easier said than done. So we'll see if that actually happens.
Well, Peter Navarro today said that Mexican drug cartels are becoming sort of entrenched in Canada. I'm like, where's the evidence of that? Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't, but this is the first I've really heard of that. It's alarming to me.
Well, so the thing about criminal organizations. The Americans would call it the mob. The Russian mafia is one of the bigger supporters of Putin. Japan has the Yakuza, which is the Japanese mafia. It's every place has that. The organized crime that goes along with these things. They tend to not necessarily, since they're not paying attention to the law anyway. Why would they pay attention to national borders? So would it surprise me if Mexican cartels had branches in Canada? That wouldn't surprise me at all. I know for a hard fact that the Russian mafia has strong cells in New York City, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles, just for the things that I know off the top of my head. It wouldn't surprise me if they have Russian mafia control little cells everywhere as well. It was a big deal after 9/11, hunting down Al-Qaeda cells not over in Afghanistan, both in the Middle East as well as in Europe and in the United States. The Japanese mafia has people everywhere, including inside of Russia, which I think is a little funny. Yeah, so would it surprise me? No. How big of a problem it is? You can look at some of those graphs where how much fentanyl, because that's Trump's big bugaboo, which, to be fair, fentanyl is a problem inside the United States, and it's coming in from outside. It's Mexico mainly and China, but a very tiny proportion of it comes in through Canada, like 1 or 2%. I don't remember the exact number. It's tiny.
Less than 1% or about 1%, yeah.
I mean, there's some crossing, and
in total, 42 pounds seized last year, 21,000 change on the Mexico
so
border.
It's tiny. It's real, but it's tiny. Should we take care of the tiny problem? Yes. But it's not worth a trade war over.
Or
like
worse,
said, that's just stupid.
He's literally talking about annexing the country. He keeps talking about the 51st state. I'm taking it fairly seriously because
I think you should.
I've been saying this for 2 years. I've seen the warning signs, the trial balloons being floated by conservative influencers online, the phone call to the Prime Minister's office from Tucker Carlson saying he's coming to Canada to liberate the country. I said he's not joking. This is setting things up. He's normalizing this idea for people, and it's coming. There's something coming.
And Trump's attempt to dismantle the United States government, the Department of Justice, the USAID, especially the FBI, is part of the Department of Justice, even though it kind of sort of stands apart. It's somewhat independent, hopefully. The sheer fire hose of destruction in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration on the United States government, and all of the firewalls that were in place to prevent the abuse of power and criminal acts out of the White House. I think, I don't know if it'll happen, but I don't think that people should say, yeah, that's never going to happen. That's not what we're seeing. We're seeing a real problem. We're seeing a real need for people to push back. And that includes Canada now. And I'm sorry.
It didn't surprise me as much as many other people, but it still boggles my mind. There's no need for this. If he wants us to help him with something, all he has to do is ask, not punch us in the face.
Like I said, Trudeau just said, yeah, we're going to do what we promised to do already when Biden was president.
That's right. And I said that last night too. Mm-hmm. This is just stupid is what it comes down to. And I've heard some prominent analysts, mostly out of like the UK. I heard one guy last night say, this is a democratic coup that we've had happen in the US. And I understand what he means. Because Trump has come in, and I guess you can look at it as he's cleaning out the deep state, but no, he's purging government to put people in who are in alignment with him ideologically. This is a war on liberalism, progressivism. It's not
small
even
L liberalism,
right.
small D Democrat. the classic Western liberalism that's basically democracy.
Yeah.
Is what we're talking about. And this is how authoritarianism starts. I think people should be concerned. I think they have a legitimate reason to be concerned. I think all of the people in Canada that were buying into some of the Russian propaganda that was supportive of Trump need to take a hard look at what they did. I know some of them are your listeners. Hopefully some of them are still your listeners. But it's a real movement inside the United States too. And there's a whole echo zone. They don't want to hear it.
It is difficult to speak to people who are in that frame of mind because you're blowing up their world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you're attacking and going after some of their beliefs that were fairly core. Their immediate pushback should not surprise anyone. Whether they come around or not is a separate question. I hope they do. If it starts hitting them personally, I hope that I don't know how personal this is. Sorry.
It's amazing how I see this self-abuse taking place. It's like, well, it's our own fault. It's our own government's fault. We did it to us, as Trump is initiating this trade war that threatens between 1 million and 1.5 million jobs in the country, plunges into a depression, potentially.
What does that have to do with Canadian government? Maybe you should educate me on that, because I'm not seeing the logic there at all.
No, I don't get it either. I mean, they're saying it's because the government left us too vulnerable. I mean, a myriad of excuses, like vulnerable or not.
What could you have done?
Right. Like the reason one of the main reasons we're vulnerable is because we never saw a threat. We thought we were friends. Why would we ever think that the United States would attack us on any level like this?
And how many decades of examples of Canada and America are close allies do you have behind yet?
Right.
I mean, does that go back 100 years? I mean, how far back does that go? It's a long time.
Over 200 years, really. I mean, at least over 150 since Confederation. But
I'd like to say that there was combat with Canadians maybe in the War of 1812.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's around it. Yeah.
So
yeah, and we are different than the United States. We are our own sovereign country. We are different, and even the way we look at politics is different. It always has been, because we saw what happened with your Civil War, and our first Prime Minister said we want a system of government that will help us avoid a conflict like that, because he saw the devastation and wanted to do what he could to avoid that. So we ended up with a parliamentary system, not what you guys have down there. Not that I'm
pluses or minuses to parliamentary too. So
right. I mean, so it's just, but we're just different. We just
Germany's dealing with one of the minuses right now, because the Alliance for Germany, the AfD, the radical fascist party in Germany right now, and it's not an exaggeration to say it's pro-Nazi, because I took a hard look when I was there. Germany has a parliamentary system, and they're worried about AfD getting 25% of parliament. Mm-hmm. So that's huge. That's a lot of support inside of Germany for a nation that explicitly, publicly condemns even the merest breath of Nazism. But 25% in a non-parliamentary system is not any sort of power base. So there's pluses and minuses to both systems.
Of course. Yes.
One thing I would say is there have been a lot of hand-wringing from the American left particularly, but that sort of isolationism is now part of the American right under Trump. A lot of these things flip. The left and right in the United States has flipped several times over the last, certainly 150 years. That's a longer discussion. But one of the hand-wringing things when we were talking about after World War II, when the United States became the dominant nation on the planet, taking over from the British Empire, was this sort of hand-wringing about American empire. I think this is a little bit silly because the history of the United States is that when we conquer somebody, we rebuild them and we make them independent. We did that with Japan and Germany, and now they're very close allies. South Korea, that we liberated from Japan. We tried to do that with China, but that was a lot more complicated. Excuse me. We even helped rebuild Russia after World War II a little bit. Italy. We had less success more recently in Iraq and Afghanistan, but we at least tried. We certainly didn't take them as colonies. And so this notion that the United States is an empire, well, we have economic and military dominance, but we want friends. We want independent friends because that benefits the United States more than a colony would. Than a colony that doesn't want to be a colony. Why? I mean that if you have a friendly independent state that helps and shares and collaborates and all these kinds of things that friendly nations do with each other, that benefits the United States far more than anything else. And Trump trying to go all manifest destiny and empire on this blows up this type of notion that America is the good guy. The notion, one of the things that I dealt with when I was a member of the United States Air Force is this notion of soft power. Soft power is where you can exert influence outside of your borders and inside your borders, frankly, because you have legitimacy. You have a reputation for being an honest actor, for being the good guy, for helping build. You're not tearing down, you're helping build. And that sort of soft power is something that America can use to convince people to do good things. This sort of approach from Trump destroys America's ability to project soft power. It literally makes us weaker. I don't think he understands that. This is not the sort of thinking that he has. Zero-sum game. I don't know if we've talked about that before, where Trump thinks that in order for him to win, somebody else has to lose. He wants to be seen as the winner. So a win-win is something that's really not something that's part of the way Trump thinks. So yeah, we're seeing the fallout from that now, where if Trump wins, Canada has to lose. Now, that isn't how it played out, and I think people should scream to the rafters that Trump got played by Trudeau, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the leader of Mexico off the top of my head.
Scheinbaum.
Yeah, it was a German name, and I couldn't remember it. So Trump got played by Mexico and Canada, and that needs to be screamed to the rafters. Now, what that will do to Trump, could that either box him in and make him less able to do anything in the future? I don't know. Trump's history is that if he is seen as weak and failing and as a sucker, he's going to lash out. But you can't be afraid of him lashing out, just like you can't be afraid of what Putin's going to do. You have to figure out what you're going to do to Putin. So if you're going to resist Trump, you have to figure out what you're going to do to Trump rather than worry about what he's going to do to you. Because if you're playing defense the whole time, that's not a way to go after it. That's not a way to win.
Well, I've taken note of the way other leaders, including Trudeau and the president of Mexico, have phrased things, and they've been very diplomatic, even now, right? Like they could have said, like they're not dancing around saying we won, he lost. They're just very careful in their words.
One of the ways that the leaders could do that is be diplomatic in their statements, but then encourage all of their followers and citizens to not be so diplomatic. So that's one of the ways that you could go after.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, people here are canceling travel plans to the U.S. now.
Yeah. You can't trust them.
Yep, tearing, not buying American.
If the border shuts. I liked Trudeau was kind of funny because I mentioned where all of those military infrastructure plants went in the United States, and they were all in heavy red Trump voting districts. And Trudeau was going after Kentucky bourbon, All sorts of things in red states is what he was going after.
Yeah, and Trump, in my estimation, was using illegal immigration and drugs as a legal basis to justify whatever it is that his end game is here, which, I think in Canada, I think he really does want to annex at least part of the country. I think he'd like to have at least Alberta and all the oil that is there, even though he says you guys don't need it, but I think he'd like to have it.
The United States is the largest oil exporter on the planet. We beat out the Saudis. We beat out the Russians. We import oil from Canada because of my dad's a petroleum geologist, so I grew up hearing about how petroleum works. And so what initial organic material formed the oil, and then the geological processes local to where that oil formed affects what kind of oil and how you refine it, and what kind of things are more easily made out of the crude that you bring out of the ground. So like there's light sweet crude, there's dark crude, there's dirty crude, there's different types of coal too, if you care. And the type of oil that comes out of Canada specifically is what the refineries in the Midwest of the United States are set up to refine, as opposed to some of the American oil. So that's the situation that we had developed with Canada, is that you guys produce the crude and we refine it and everybody wins, and it's this business arrangement. But yeah, if Canada shut down their crude exports to the United States, all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of refineries inside the United States that would either have to shut down, or they would have to temporarily shut down and reconfigure themselves so they could actually refine American crude.
Yeah. So it's just been very destabilizing, and the immigration thing. Again, the response to this, even spending $1 billion trying to completely cover the Canada-U.S. border, which has always been the world's longest undefended border.
Yeah.
Good luck.
That used to be a source of pride.
Yeah, that's right. And it just seems to me like what we have because of Trump now is we're going to have a bunch of people running around pretending like they're doing something without a real effective plan to deal with drugs and an immigration issue. Meanwhile, the real problem with the immigration is already within both of our countries. And in the U.S., you have a president who has empowered ICE to go after a bunch of people, to round them up and ship them off on planes where they were sort of already going before, but it's like a show. And he makes sure that these, I think the phrase they used was, the officers have to be camera ready.
Yeah.
So it was very much a show.
It's a public affairs thing because Trump was an entertainer. He was a con man. And I mean that in a literal, I mean that in both the literal sense where he was the confidence man, because every business has to have a confidence man. Elon Musk is the confidence man for SpaceX and Tesla. He is not the scientific genius. He is the confidence man. He is the salesman. So all the innovations at SpaceX and Tesla are not Elon Musk's. I will put that out as many times as you say. He is not the genius in the room. He is the front man. He is the salesman. He is the confidence man. Trump is also a con man in the more derogatory sense. And I think Elon Musk is going that direction. Elon didn't used to be, but now he started anyway. That's part of that show where everything has to be a TV show, like The Apprentice, you're fired kind of crap.
Yeah.
So we need to revisit, because Vice President Kamala Harris, got a lot of flack that she did not deserve. Whatever else you might think of her, but she got a lot of flack on the campaign trail, like, you failed immigration, but she did. So the biggest problem in the United States, I'm not sure about Canada, was the immigration not from Mexico, which was stable and what it had been. We've got the migrant belt that the agricultural workers that The migrant belt was inside of California and down the other side of the Rockies in Colorado, and it followed the seasons and who was planting and who was harvesting. So you had the migrant belt where you had the seasonal migrants that would help with the agriculture. They were vastly, almost 100% illegal, but that's the migrant belt, and it's part of more than 100 years of American history at this point. The immigration from Mexico was relatively stable, and it was like that. There was some influxes in construction in places like Georgia and Florida where it hadn't happened, but it was still the same numbers coming out of Mexico. The problem that we were having was a legacy from the Cold War, where places like Colombia and Nicaragua and Venezuela and Guatemala and Honduras had been destabilized. There were these proxy fights between the Soviet Union and the United States, and they really hit the news in the Ronald Reagan administration, the Iran-Contra scandal, if you remember that, where it was it Nicaraguan Contras? I don't remember.
Yeah, the Sandinistas, right?
Yeah, and so there was all these things where both, if it was a country like Venezuela or Cuba, for that matter, that was leaning towards the Soviets, the Americans would go in there both openly and clandestinely, that we would undercut that government. So we would destroy trust in police and in the judges and in the government, and just destroy trust in all of the institutions to try and destabilize the government that was friendly to the Soviet Union. The Soviets would do that in nations that were friendly to the United States. And so what you have is you have all of those nations still, because once the Soviets fell, they weren't going to help. And that left it to the United States. And we did a really poor job of it in the 90s, especially, but also in the 2000s, where you had all of these basically failed nations. And you had citizens that were in nations where the police were corrupt and the judges were corrupt and the government was corrupt, and you couldn't trust the vote, because that's what we had done in the Cold War when we were trying to do these proxy conflicts inside of third nations. So what Kamala Harris as vice president, Joe Biden had appointed her to address those specific concerns, because Biden was old, but what that means is he had seen it happen ever since he became a member of Congress a long time ago in the 70s. So he had seen a lot of this happen. He had seen the fallout in the 90s, right? So he had seen it as vice president under President Obama. So he was very familiar with the situation, and that's what Kamala Harris was trying to address. We had made significant progress over 4 years in trying to restabilize and rebuild those nations. And Trump was complaining about there's this migrant caravan, but it was coming out of places like Colombia and Honduras and Guatemala. It was not Mexican immigration. It was from these nations that we had completely destroyed during the Cold War. So we were trying to get those nations to be places where their own citizens wanted to live. If you don't do that, immigration's not going to change. Those people are going to want to go somewhere else. They're going to want to go a place where the police are not corrupt, where they can raise their children in peace, where the schools are actually going to educate their kids. So they wanted to come to America because, like I said, soft power and all that kind of stuff. America was a place that they wanted to go. But you're not going to fix immigration if you don't fix the nations where people want to leave. So I don't see how Trump's going to fix that. I don't see a plan. He never mentioned that that was even a problem. If you mention this to American conservatives specifically, I don't know about Canada, they look at you like you're talking French. They have no idea what you're talking about. And you're like, you don't actually understand immigration. Mm-hmm. You don't understand what the current problem is. And this is completely separate from the Mexican cartels and the fentanyl, which is a separate problem. And
right.
That would be something that I might actually agree with President Trump on, that you got to go after the cartels and you got to go after fentanyl. You just have no other choice. Too many Americans are dying, and that's a legitimate concern.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I'm not sure I agree with his approach to it.
Well, yeah.
But I'm very concerned about what I'm seeing with Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, me too.
Because it just seems like he's trying to do an end run around people's rights.
They're setting up a camp in Guantanamo Bay where all of the people sent there don't have access to lawyers. You can't get the human rights advocates. Maybe this is something that of all nations, Cuba can push hard for, is access to the immigration camp in Guantanamo Bay. When Cuba is your hope, now Cuba's made some strides, but Trump kept shutting those down. They made most of their strides under President Obama, but then Trump blew that up. And I don't think Joe Biden did a very good job putting it back together. It wasn't his priority. So, but Cuba is our hope.
Well, look, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not an expert when it comes to U.S. constitutional law. But as I understand it, people in the United States who are illegal immigrants still have some rights.
They have statutory rights
U.S. law.
Them by Congress, yes.
Yeah, but then if you take them and transport them to Guantanamo, those rights are even further diminished. And so I saw Kristi Noem interviewed, asked, will these prisoners be entitled to due process? And she says, oh, yes, of course they will. But that's kind of like a half truth, because they're entitled to the due process under the law as it's written pertaining to them. But at Guantanamo Bay, that due process is not what's afforded to, say, a U.S. citizen on American soil. You have a right to a lawyer, but they don't provide one for you. And if you have no money, there's no way for you to hire one. So you could sit there. You don't have to be charged with anything. You can be held indefinitely if you're being held there for reasons that constitute some sort of a threat to national security, or an invasion, which is a word that Trump keeps using with regard to immigration. So he can just scoop people up, send them off to Guantanamo, keep them there indefinitely without even being charged with anything. And maybe that's maybe too loosely interpreting the Constitution and the violation of people's rights. But on the other hand, I don't really think so.
I can't disagree with anything that you just said. It looks bad. It looks horrifying, to be quite honest. There are words that I would use to describe that, which I hope are not accurate. Things like concentration camp. I hope that's not accurate, but that's what it's starting to look like. Where Congress passed these statutory, the laws granting statutory rights to immigrants, and the violation of American law that crossing the border without permission is it's a civil infraction. It's akin to a speeding ticket or a parking ticket. You're someplace where you weren't supposed to be, or doing something minorly illegal. That's what U.S. law says about it.
Yeah.
But the executive branch is charged with enforcing the law, not Congress. So President Trump being elected and having the control of enforcing the law has real consequences. Elections have consequences. So it doesn't look good to me. The only thing I can think is people need to push back. But if they're being held inside the continental United States, the lawyers and the human rights advocates can go right up to the camp and say, hey, let me in. But the only way to get to the camp in Guantanamo is aboard a military flight, unless Cuba starts allowing them in. That's why I'm saying that maybe one of the hopes is Cuba. So Cuba has been screaming about it because they don't like the existence of Guantanamo to begin with. We'll see how.
Yeah, I mean, they can, as I understand it, they can even suspend habeas corpus. I don't think they're even.
They already are, as far as I can tell.
So I don't think they're releasing even lists of names. So he could be scooping people up and people just disappear, essentially, to Guantanamo. Then who knows what happens to them there? We won't know who's there, who's incarcerated, how long they're going to be held there. And again, Kristi Noem, I think she was misleading people when she said they're being sent to Guantanamo until they can be sent on to their country of origin. But the day before, Trump had said the reason they're being sent to Guantanamo is because these criminals are so dangerous, they can't trust their countries of origin to hold them, and that he doesn't want them coming back. So he's sending them there for, well, then I guess you're there forever.
And that's an interesting point. So if immigrants had broken the law inside the United States, they broke American law, which means that they are required to face the legal ramifications of their actions inside the United States. They're here, they're under American law. It's the American justice system that they face. So if you commit a real crime like assault or rape or murder or larceny or any sort of real criminal action, you're going to be inside the American criminal system. You're not going to be deported. So the deportations are not these hardened criminals. So I don't know what he's doing with Guantanamo. I don't think we've heard enough. I don't know how we're going to find this out. All I can say is that citizens of good intent and honor need to push back. We need to ask questions. We need to ask hard questions. We need to ask questions that have legal force. We need to be the citizens that we have to be now.
Well, freedom comes largely from ensuring people's rights. And
yes,
if you're not ensuring the rights of others, even those who are maybe not American citizens, but if you don't ensure the rights of somebody else, then you don't really have any freedom yourself.
So yeah, there's a lot of rhetoric about that in the United States, where, especially on the conservative end, they talk about God-given rights. But the only time that any sort of outside power was ever invoked was in Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, which has no legal weight. And we'll never mind here that Thomas Jefferson was an atheist. So the Declaration of Independence referred to their creator. So whatever that means to you. But in the United States Constitution, upon which all of American laws are based, the only source of legal power comes in the preamble, and that is we the people. That is the only source of American legal authority and legal power. So if we the people start asking questions, we the people are the source of the government's legal power. That's the way it's got to be pushed back against. So if we the people don't like it, we the people have to go after it.
Well, I don't like the way that it looks at all. It's one more thing that I think is damaging the reputation of the United States and making the United States much weaker. It's certainly not making America great again.
It's like what I said about he's destroying America's soft power. What I did in the United States Air Force trying to increase the influence and the power of the United States and get friendly nations to do good things, Trump is destroying the ability to do that.
So 1 week in, I have to say a week and a half, and I'm very, not even just disappointed, but outright concerned about what I'm seeing come out of the White House. Yeah. And the war in Ukraine, just to kind of bring it full circle and wrap things up tonight.
So
where are we at?
The thing that I was saying is that there was a very brief pause on military aid that was very quickly reinstated. And like I said, those transfer of Patriot missiles from Israel to Ukraine happened under Trump's watch. And it would have required, I don't know if Trump himself was involved with that, but it had to have been somebody high up in the White House that authorized that. Because 90 missiles at $1 to $4 million a pop is not chump change, even on American defense dollars. So maybe pushing Israel to send the confiscated weapons to Ukraine, maybe that's something the Trump administration could do. Europe is staking a much stronger lead over the last 12 months. That's not something new. That's at least 12 months old, and it probably started in the end of 2023 because Trump declared his candidacy really early, all the way back in 2023. So Europe has been knowing this has been a possibility for a while. They saw the first Trump term. They know what he's capable of. They know it was going to be worse this time. They saw January 6th. So they know that a lot of Trump supporters are literally out for blood at this point. So, yeah, Europe has been preparing this for a while. Zelensky is smart, and he's only become harder. He's been more honed by 3 years of war. I don't think Zelensky is going to take any garbage. I don't think the rest of Europe is. The Baltic nations are certainly not. Sweden, Finland, Poland, or Romania are definitely not. Those are all people that are really hard against Russia at this point. So yeah, the Danes of all people. But yeah, it's going to be rough going forward. I don't think Russia's winning. Even they're gaining ground, I don't think they're winning. There's a little bit of rope-a-dope going on where Ukraine is allowing Russia to bleed itself dry. So yeah, I don't see Russia winning in Ukraine. I just don't. Hopefully America won't stop supporting them. I don't think Trump is going to like being seen as a loser, as the guy that surrendered, or the guy that allowed Putin to take over Ukraine, because all sorts of nasty is going to come out, and then they're going to like, Trump allowed this. I don't see Trump doing that, but we'll see if that's possible. Yeah, there's a lot of dark, but there's also, well, maybe there's some hope, and we have to fight for it.
Sorry. Mike Pekarek, thank you so much. Anything else you'd like to add tonight, sir?
Yeah, you made me think. One of the things when I appear on your show that I don't necessarily do well is those final words. And I did some thinking on this one. I'd like to read. Sorry, my iPad's very bright. That's why I've got that Halloween-y uplit face right now. I opened my iPad. I'd like to read some words from Abraham Lincoln as a closing thought. This was in 1862 in his address to Congress, the State of the Union. Lincoln said, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the storming present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare one or another of us. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down, in honor or dishonor, to the latest generation."
And the words of the past light the way to the future. Mike Pekarek, thank you so much. We'll have you back.
All right. Thanks, sir.
He started with nothing, just metal and a dream. Wrenches in his hand, a vision so pristine. Day after day, he'd work till the stars shine, building a machine, one of a kind. Grease on his fingers, fire in his eyes. He'd smile at that engine like it was alive. He'd say, "Son, one day this will be yours." But I never knew how much it meant until he closed those doors. Now I'm rolling down memory lane behind the wheel of that old Mustang. Every shift, every turn I feel him near. The sound of that engine, it's my dad I hear. Filled with pride, with his hands and his heart. Every drive brings me back to the start. In this dream car, he's never too far. I remember my dad every time I start. He taught me to drive, not just on the road, but through life's twists and turns and heavy loads. Now when I hit the gas and the tires start to sing, it's like he's riding shotgun with the wind under our wings. He's there in the chrome, in the roar of the gears, his laughter in the echoes, his wisdom through the years. This car ain't just metal, it's a piece of his soul, and every mile I ride I feel it whole. Now I'm rolling down memory lane behind the wheel of that old Mustang. Every shift, every turn I feel it near. The sound of that engine his heart. Every drive brings me back to the start. In this dream car, he's never too far. I remember my dad every time I start. Through the rain and the rust, it still shines so bright, like the love he put into every late night. And though he's gone, I know he's still here. In every curve of this car, I see him clear. Now I'm rolling down memory lane, behind the wheel of that old Mustang. Every shift, every turn, I feel the near. The sound of that engine is my dad I hear. Moving pride with his hands and his heart. Every drive brings me back to the start. In this dream car, he's never too far. I remember my dad every time I start. Yeah, I remember my dad every time I start.
See you guys tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll have bad jokes from my dad on the flip side.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.